What is Pathfinder 2nd Edition like for 5e players? What's that all about? And can 5e players still find dungeons or dragons in Pathfinder? Spoilers, yes they can. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This video chapter is all for Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition players moving over to Pathfinder 2nd Edition who want some real details on how the systems differ, or for the people who just want to understand the main differences between the two systems. This video chapter is a big one and is very information heavy, and it has more than enough of it to get 5e players started in PF2E. If you're only looking to know the basics of PF2E, I have you covered with a much shorter video of mine, Pathfinder 2nd Edition Explained, a comprehensive summary, which I'll link to in the description. It also has information if you're looking to put some money down immediately and jump straight in. Otherwise, take breaks as necessary, watching chapters, whatever you need to be able to take in all this info, as your brain can only take in so much at once. There's a couple of things I want to mention before I get started, and while I'd recommend hearing me out, you can go ahead and skip to the timestamp currently on screen to get straight to the video chapter's content. Apologies for the long intro. Firstly, the Archives of Nethys website has all of the PF2E rules and systems available for free, legally, and it has a section at the top of the page for new players. Secondly, I'll be using Path Builder for a lot of my images and text, which is a character creator for PF2E that all my players use. I'm not sponsored by Path Builder, but I do recommend it as it's a one-off cost that's pretty cheap and it has all of the PF2E content available. I'll link to both websites I've just mentioned in the description. Lastly, while I won't be bashing 5e in this video chapter, for the sake of transparency, I will mention this. PF2E is my preferred system because everything is available for free, it offers much more character building options, it's much easier to GM, and generally just has more of everything at a higher quality compared to 5e. And it really doesn't take long to learn. You could just swap out a single 5e session and you'd be more or less good to go with Pathfinder. Right, that's enough of that, let's get to it. Okay, so we're going to begin with some of the key features of PF2E, as these are essential to understanding the differences between the systems. After that, I'll be going through the similarities between the systems, followed by their differences. It may seem redundant to show these similarities, but there are many differences between the systems hidden under the similarities. Despite these similarities, I just want to put a mini disclaimer here to say that these systems are not the same and they need to be treated differently, especially if you're a GM. If you try to run PF2E with some of the other rules you've learned from 5e, especially homebrew ones, I guarantee you're going to have a very bad time because the maths in this system is extremely tight and well balanced. I cannot emphasize this enough. Okay, with that out of the way, let's jump into the contents of this video chapter, and feel free to skip ahead to the timestamps that'll be in the video description. We will be going over the key PF2E features that you'll need to understand to be able to follow this video, which are the 3-action economy, the 4 degrees of success, and the trait system. After that, we'll get into the similar concepts and their differences, which are races and subraces, classes and subclasses, ability scores, backgrounds and feats, skills and actions, spells and conditions, monsters and items. Then I'll go over some miscellaneous stuff that didn't really fit in anywhere specific. Right, so first up, the 3-action economy. So, the 3-action economy comes into play as soon as you enter combat. All characters in combat, PC or NPC, follow the same rules. You start every turn with 3 actions, and every single thing you do costs an action. Move, action. Draw weapon, action. Attack, action. Every character has these 3 actions from level 1 all the way to level 20, meaning that the pace of combat stays pretty consistent across the levels. And with levels in mind, a quick side note here, PF2E works all the way to level 20, so you actually get to play with the crazy powerful abilities, and the game stays balanced and fun. Some actions can cost more than a single action, such as casting spells. These usually cost 2, though some can be single actions, such as casting shield on yourself, or even 3 actions, such as summoning a creature. And some actions can be kinda strange, like commanding your animal companion, which costs 1 action, but actually gives them 2 actions to use. The 3-action economy gives the game this tactical edge, where you can go out of your way to try and cost the enemy their precious actions, by doing things like using the trip skill action to knock them prone, or by simply moving away from them, forcing them to spend an action to move back to you. Obviously this costs you actions also, so you may need to think through your options before utilising your actions. Like 5e, you also get reactions, and you're limited to 1 a turn. At the start of each turn, unless you have a specific condition like slow, you always get back your 3 actions, and you also get free actions that can be things like dropping weapons, though there isn't really a limit on how many of these you can do in 1 turn. Making things more complex and adding to the tactical layer is the multiple attack penalty, or MAP. If you attack more than once in a single turn, or use an ability that tells you to increase your MAP, you will be subject to a penalty on your next attack roll. This means that on your second attack in that round, you would have a -5 penalty to it. And if you attack again, you will get a -10. It caps out at -10 though, and you can take steps to reduce the MAP, such as using an agile weapon, which lowers it to a -4 and then a -8 instead. Attacks done as part of a reaction don't suffer from the MAP, however, so it might be worth spending an action just to move into position so you can trigger an attack via a reaction, versus attacking with a big penalty. Other abilities, such as grapple, can count towards the MAP, and so do spell attack rolls, but not spells that require saving throws. This means that you can cast certain spells like Fireball, then shoot at someone with a gun, with no MAP applying to the gunshot. And you can start to see how this opens up potential character build options and can make combat feel quite tactical. Some classes even get abilities to help mitigate the MEP further, but that will be a whole other video to go into, so we'll leave that there. And that's basically the 3-action economy summed up. Next, we have the 4 degrees of success. Just like in 5th edition, when you roll a d20 and get a natural 20, you get a critical hit. And when you roll a d20 and get a natural 1, you get a critical fail. But in PF2E, you can also get a crit or a crit fail without rolling a natural 20 or a nat 1. And this all comes from the 4 degrees of success. Basically, if the number rolled exceeds or subseeds, which should definitely be a real word, the DC by 10, that is also a critical hit or a critical fail. So if your enemy has an AC of 15 and you have an attack modifier of +10, if you roll a 15 or above, that's a crit. And it works the same way if the enemy was hitting you. Some abilities, usually spells, come with specific outcomes listed within the spell description, all depending on how well you roll with the required saving throw. I'll get into saving throws in the ability score section, don't worry. The Grim Tendril spell, for example, works this way. Let's say the enemy has a spell DC of 15 and you have a +10 on your Fortitude saving throw. And then let's say you roll a 15 on the d20, resulting in 25. Because of this, we look to the critical success part of the spell, because the number you rolled ended up being 10 or above the DC of the spell. With the critical success, nothing happens, you're good. And if you would have rolled a natural 20, that also would have been a critical success. Sometimes there are situations where you'll roll a natural 20 and it still won't be high enough to critically succeed against the DC. While this would be extremely rare, let's create a scenario where this happens. Let's imagine the enemy has a spell DC of 22, and you now have only a +5 on your saving throw. You'd now have to roll a 27 to critically succeed against the spell, which obviously isn't possible on a d20. But if you rolled a natural 20, the degree of success is bumped up 1 notch. And even though overall you rolled a 25, this success becomes a critical success. And it works exactly the same with critical failures. If you roll a fail, but it's still 10 below the DC, that's now a critical failure. And if it was a natural 1, it would be bumped down a level rather than up 1. There's also some spells and abilities that say basic saves, which means that, on a critically successful save, you take no damage, on a normal success, half damage, on a fail, normal damage, and on a critical fail, you take double damage. Okay, one last little note, and then we're done with the 4 degrees of success. Flanking. If you and an ally are at opposite sides of an enemy, they become off guard. This means that they take a -2 on their AC. All you have to do is move both characters into position and boom! Suddenly, the enemy is now not only 10% more likely to get hit, but they're also more likely to get crit too. Hopefully now you can understand why in PF2E, every +1 matters, as they say. I should also mention quickly that crits can actually do a lot more damage in PF2E than they do in 5e, as you actually double the entire end result rather than rolling multiple times. Crits really are extremely deadly in PF2E. Hopefully that all made sense. Let's move on to the next section, the trait system. Luckily, this one won't be too complex. Almost everything in PF2E has traits, such as the Grim Tendril spell from earlier having the Concentrate, Manipulate, and Void traits. Traits are basically shorthand for how things function, like the Long Spear weapon having the Reach trait, meaning that it has an extra 5 feet of reach for melee combat. There's lots of different traits in PF2E, and while they can be initially confusing, before long, you'll understand what most of them mean without needing to browse or look through a rulebook, which ends up massively speeding up sessions as you just get what things do by reading a single word rather than having to read multiple sentences. A good example of traits is the attack trait. Anything with the attack trait is subject to the MAP. Remember how I mentioned that grapple is subject to the MAP also? This is because it has the attack trait. Another example of an important trait is the Concentrate trait. This trait is generally assigned to things like spells or abilities that, unsurprisingly, require concentration, and isn't usable under certain circumstances like being in a rage, which is another trait. You can see how running the PF2E system can be pretty quick and relatively simple once you've learned how some of the traits work anyway. Last point on traits, commonality is also shown via the trait system. So if there's no mention of rarity in whatever item, feat, spell, etc. you're looking at, then it's probably common, but otherwise it'll say that it's uncommon, rare, or unique. It's part of the rules to speak with your GM if something isn't common, as some of the rarer things in PF2E can be a little more powerful than common things or may even disrupt the setting, like guns or automatons being uncommon and rare respectively. Okay, we are now done with the unique features of PF2E, or at least enough for you to understand the rest of the video, and hopefully enough to understand what makes PF2E stand out amongst other TTRPGs. So now let's get on to the similar concepts from 5e and how they differ in PF2E. First up, races and subraces. Okay, so generally speaking, there's not a lot of changes in this part, fortunately, aside from there being different races to pick in PF2E, of course. Most of the ones you'd expect are here, like elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings, humans, orcs, etc. But the bigger way in which these two systems differ is in the name for race and subrace. In PF2E, these are instead called ancestry and heritage, which kind of makes more sense when you think about it. I mean, how is a dragonborn only a different race to a gnome? Surely they're different species entirely. Anyway, in PF2E, if you wanted to be an elf, you'd choose the elf ancestry, and your choice of heritage would be ancient, arctic, cavern, desert, seer, whisper, or woodland elf, and each of these come with minor benefits. And all ancestries in PF2E can have their heritage be half elven or half orc, and there's even support for mixing with any other ancestry, like having a half dwarf, half gnome, for example. Though this makes my dragonborn gnome not the same race thing a little silly. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from having a half android, half leshy in PF2E. Anyway, and this is where races like Aasimar or Tiefling come in. In PF2E, these are heritages that can be applied to any ancestry, with their name being changed to Nephilim. So you could be a half-dwarf Nephilim if you wanted, with hooves and a tail, or with angel wings. And there's around 15 of these heritages right now, so you have a lot of choice. Aside from that, the only difference here, aside from minor stat changes, is in ability scores and how they're handled, but I'll go over that later on. Next up, classes and subclasses. First of all, PF2E has over 20 different classes as of the release of this video, and we tend to get new added every year. Like in 5e, classes are pretty unique, and most classes have defined roles, though this can be customized through subclass, or more importantly for PF2E, feats. I'll get into feats a little later on. The biggest change here is that subclasses in PF2E generally aren't as big of a deal as they are in 5e, and some classes in PF2E don't even have subclasses, like the fighter or monk. And some get 2 subclasses, like the psychic or the thaumaturge, which gets to pick more as it levels. Generally though, classes are customized with the huge selection of feats in PF2E, not their subclass. There's so many feats that you will never come across the same class build twice. Also, all of the classes in PF2E are very well balanced. There's no bad classes here, though there are higher and lower complexity classes, but they all end up feeling fairly in line with each other, despite feeling different to play. This balance also helps encourage teamwork, as no one class can ever be the best at more than a couple of things. PF2E really is a cooperative game in every sense of the word, and trying to play it as a master of all things isn't going to work out well for you. Another change is that the Paladin in PF2E is called Champion, as Paladin is a subclass of the Champion itself in this system. And while there is no Warlock or Artificer in PF2E, there's more than a few ways to customize a class to make it very similar. More complicated in PF2E though is the multi-classing system, if you can call it that, as it's not true multi-classing in the traditional sense. There is a variant rule called dual class for those who want even crazier class build options, though it can be a little bit unbalanced and it's definitely for more advanced players. Anyway, PF2E multiclassing. This is done via dedications. Starting at level 2, you're able to pick a dedication, which is essentially choosing a class to start grabbing feats and abilities from. Ultimately, this dedication becomes a sort of mini-class to you, and generally your main class stays as strong as it always would, despite you having abilities from another class. For example, if you were a sorcerer, you could start grabbing ranger feats like Animal Companion, and you'd still get your max level of spells once you reach the higher levels. And you wouldn't fall behind with your spell levels either. Your spell levels would increase as they normally would. You don't miss out because you wanted to multiclass in PF2E. There's also lots of other dedications you can choose to start grabbing feats from that aren't normal classes, like the Acrobat, Archer, Blessed One, Shield Marshal, Undead Master. There's actually over 150 dedications currently in the system, which is madness. Lastly, some classes have an archetype you can choose, such as the Spell Shot for Gunslinger, or the Elementalist for spellcasters that use arcane or primal magic. I'll go over these magic types later, don't worry. And these archetypes change how the class functions to a certain extent. Okay, on with the next one. Ability scores. I'll quickly mention that HP and AC work rather similarly in 5e, in that you get AC for dexterity plus your armor, with a dex cap plus your proficiency, which I'll get to later. The numbers are slightly different between the systems, but other than that, they're mostly worked out the same way. And health works almost identically, except you always get a set amount of HP and don't roll for it, at least in the default rules, and you get a little more HP at level 1 in PF2e than you do in 5e, as you add your ancestry's HP to your character as well. For example, if you were a dwarven fighter, you get 10 HP from your ancestry, 10 from your class, meaning that you'd have over 20 HP at level 1, and that's before adding your constitution modifier. This makes lower levels a little less swingy in PF2e than in 5e. Similar to HP and AC, resistances and vulnerabilities, or weaknesses as they're called here. This one's very simple. Resistance and weakness in PF2e also comes with a number rather than just the damage being halved or doubled. So if a fire creature says it has resistance 10 to fire, this means that you'd need to do 11 fire damage for it to take 1 damage from your attack. If you did 25 fire damage, it would only take 15, and so on. And if it has weakness 10 to water, that means that you add on that damage when you deal water damage. So if you did 5 water damage, that's suddenly 15 water damage, and even doing a single point of water damage would trigger the weakness too, meaning 1 water damage would be 11 damage. On a crit, however, you don't double the weakness value, as you add the weakness damage at the very end of your damage calculation. On to actual ability scores. First of all, they're now called attributes, and they start at 0 rather than 10. The actual modifiers still work in exactly the same way. When you put a boost into an attribute that's 0, you get a +1 to that attribute. And yes, points are now called boosts, and they count as 2 points if you were still using the 5e scale. So a boost to an attribute of 10 would make it 12, giving you +1, etc. And here's how these attributes would look if you were using the old D&D scale. Starting at 0 doesn't mean that you can't go into negative values, by the way. You can still start the game with a minus on one of your attributes. And in PF2e, like in older editions of D&D, there's only 3 saving throws, simplifying things a little: Fortitude, Reflex, and Will. As for the attributes themselves, all of them have a different effect on your skills, but aside from that, Strength increases melee damage and to-hit chance, and some range damage, as well as your carrying capacity. Dex increases AC, your reflex saving throw, and chance to hit with ranged or finesse weapons, and only one subclass does extra damage with dexterity, by the way. Constitution increases HP and your fortitude saving throw. Intelligence increases the amount of skills you are proficient with, plus gives you another language learned, and can increase your hit chance with a certain class and your spell attack bonus or DC with some more. Wisdom increases your will saving throw, perception, yes, perception is tied to wisdom here, spell attack bonus or DC with some classes, and charisma increases your spell attack bonus or DC with some classes. And any abilities that get added outside of your class, usually called innate abilities, use your charisma for DCs, etc. Now the more complicated part of attributes, when you get your boosts. So with each of your main choices at character creation, which we call the ABCs of character creation, ancestry, background, class, you get given some boosts and some boost choices. Some ancestries come with an attribute penalty that also gives you an extra boost, but these are entirely optional, so for the sake of simplicity, we'll pretend they don't exist. Most of my players choose not to use them anyway. I'm going to explain how this works by using 4 stages. This is because explaining how to assign boosts, specifically when you assign a boost to the same attribute multiple times, can sound rather confusing. It isn't in practice, however. So, starting with stage 1, ancestry, let's say you chose a dwarf. So you'll get 2 free boost choices, as you do with all the other ancestries. This means that you can put them in any attribute, but not the same 2, at least not in the same stage. Then, at stage 2, if we chose the warrior background, I'll get into backgrounds next, don't worry, you get given a choice. You can take a boost to strength or constitution. This makes sense because you're a warrior. Then, you get a free boost, but again, not in an attribute you already chose in this particular stage. You could choose to boost one or both of the same attributes from stage 1, however, if you wanted to. Then stage 3, your class. Most classes have a set boost that you cannot alter, like the cleric getting wisdom or wizard getting intelligence, but some classes get to pick from a few, like fighter getting to pick either strength or dexterity. And don't get me started on the rogue. Most classes get abilities that key off of this attribute, usually for spell DCs or class DCs, which is something unique to PF2E. So you need to be somewhat careful in what you choose here. Lastly, we have stage 4. You get 4 free attribute boosts, all to different attributes in this particular stage. This means that the highest attribute you could have by now is +4, or 18 by 5e standards. And this is the max that PF2E allows at level 1, even if you use variant rules like voluntary flaws, which I'm not going to get into now. This is to keep the game balanced and not have some characters overshadowing other party members because of system mastery or lucky stat rolls. Speaking of system mastery, a little tip for new players to the system, I would highly recommend you get a +4 or an 18 by 5e standards in your key attribute. Other than that, you can pretty much spend your attributes wherever you see fit. Okay, that was a complex one to get through. Props to you if you still know what's going on and who you are, where you are and all that. Next one up is backgrounds and feats. In PF2E, backgrounds are quite varied on the bonuses that they give you. Sometimes you get a skill proficiency, sometimes a skill feat, which I'll get into in a sec, and some don't give you anything like that at all, like the amnesiac background that gives you an extra attribute boost. Good luck justifying your character's lack of memories for every campaign, min-maxers. But they basically all give out a boost in one of 2 attributes, followed by a free boost in an attribute of your choice. There's a huge list of potential backgrounds that you can pick, and it's also very easy to create your own, something that PF2E easily supports. And that's backgrounds. But now onto one of the meatiest parts of PF2E, feats. Feats are similar to 5e in that they can give you new abilities or even ways to play your class, but that's just the tip of the iceberg in PF2E. Feats are categorized into 4 types in PF2E: ancestry, class, general, and skill. They are also level gated, meaning that some come at lower levels and some are restricted to higher levels. Usually the higher level the feat, the more powerful it tends to be, though a lot of the time feats give you greater versatility rather than being straight up power boosts. You get ancestry feats at level 1, 5, 9, 13, and 17. These feats tend to improve your ancestry itself, allowing things like dwarves getting to take no speed penalty in heavy armor, or elves getting to increase their base speed by 5 feet. Every ancestry has its own unique feats, and if you end up taking a heritage as another ancestry, like half-elf as already mentioned, you get to pick from that ancestry's feat list too. On to class feats. These are arguably the most powerful feats in the game and are, again, mostly unique from class to class. Martial characters get a class feat at level 1, then every even level, all the way up to level 20, and caster classes get the same, but don't get the first level feat, as they get spells to choose instead. There is some crossover for some feats between similar classes, such as the Barbarian and Fighter's Sudden Charge, which allows you to move pretty far and then take an attack, but these are few and far between, and most class feats are unique to that specific class. Some of these feats, especially the lower level ones, sometimes can be seen as a sort of subclass option. Fighter, for example, gets some feats that enhance dual wielding, with one of them being Double Slice, or they could pick up Vicious Swing, which works great with two-handed weapons. These feats aren't mutually exclusive, meaning that you could take both eventually, but they do kind of support a certain style of play, hence the similarity to subclasses. Then we have general feats, which come at level 3, 7, 11, 15, and 19. These feats allow you to customize your character fantasy a bit more, with feats like Toughness giving you more HP, and Armor and Weapon Proficiency opening up your weapon and armor choices. We'll get to items later on. You also get to pick skill feats within general feats if they are more useful to you. Speaking of, you get skill feats every even level, though rogues get them every level. Skill feats further increase your versatility and sometimes your power with the skills you have chosen. Good examples will be Battle Medicine, which allows you to use the medicine skill to heal in combat, or Titan Wrestler, which allows you to grapple creatures that are much bigger than you using athletics. That's feats, and as we're already talking about skills, let's jump into them proper as they're next on the list anyway. There are 16 skills in PF2E versus the 18 skills in 5e. There's also Perception, which is more of an innate ability than a skill, but for simplicity's sake, I'll include it here as a skill as it tends to be used like one anyway. All of the skills you're used to are here, with some exceptions, such as Occultism being a new skill that handles all esoteric and dark magics. Crafting has also been added as a core skill, as well as Society. Animal Handling is covered with Nature, Insight and Investigation is covered with Perception, History is covered with Society, and Sleight of Hand is called Thievery. PF2E also has lore skills like the Warfare lore skill, which you get through certain circumstances, in this case by taking the warrior background from earlier. These lore skills tend to be quite specific in their uses, but get a lower DC when used due to their specificity. Proficiency in PF2E is handled differently also. When you become trained in something, you get a bonus of +2, and you also add your level to that bonus. Later on, you can increase your proficiency further, going from trained to expert, giving you a +4 plus your level. And this continues twice more, with you becoming a master with a +6, and then legendary with a +8. Again, plus your level. Proficiency also applies to other things such as weapon and armor types, and even saving throws. Some classes, such as the champion, will get legendary proficiency with armor, and some classes, like the bard, will become legendary in will saving throws. Unlike skills, these tend to be automatic upgrades as you level up your class. Speaking of skills, let's get back to them. You can increase your proficiency in a skill at your first level up, or you can choose to be trained in another skill, it's your choice. At 7th level, you can increase a skill to master, and at 15th, you can go to legendary. Aside from proficiency, the most important part of skills is skill actions. All skills have specific actions you can do with them, such as sneak with stealth or treat wounds with medicine. And some of these can even be used in combat, like using the deception skill's create a diversion to make it easy to land a hit on a foe, or by using the athletics skill shove to forcefully push an enemy. Most of these skill actions are subject to the 4 degrees of success from earlier too, so rolling high can have critical successes and vice versa. With that in mind, you can help increase the chances of successes and crits with skills by using the aid action, which has you spend an action in your turn preparing to aid an ally. Then you spend your reaction to help out your ally, usually with a skill check of your own to do, like trying to distract the enemy, which can give bonuses to your ally's check. You can also aid allies with skills and the like outside of combat too. Every +1 matters, remember. Another quick change is that there's no ability checks in PF2E, such as an intelligence check. Everything is done via your skills or via things like saving throws, etc. Do note that different skills can actually be used in PF2E for initiative. When you break down a door, for instance, the GM might use your athletics skill roll, which are typically called checks in PF2E, to determine your initiative. And if you're sneaking around, the GM would use your stealth skill for your initiative. And there's plenty of other ways to use your other skills for initiative as long as your GM allows it. I don't think I can do a section on skills and not mention healing and medicine in PF2E. There is no short rest mechanic in this system, so the only way to restore health between fights is with healing spells or, you guessed it, medicine. Also, long rests only restore a certain amount of HP, not all of it, so you can't necessarily just sleep off getting stabbed in the face in PF2E. Medicine is actually used to heal health points as well as treat conditions. It does have a pretty long cooldown, however, with the wait being an hour long, so you really don't want to fail that medicine check. Or you could take some skill feats to reduce that cooldown. But it's almost always required that someone is trained in the medicine skill, either that or they have access to lots of different healing spells. And here's a pretty important part of feats and skills in PF2E. Retraining. You can actually spend a week of downtime and retrain parts of your character, meaning that you aren't stuck with a bad choice you made months ago just because. This opens up character building and doesn't make system mastery as necessary. Okay, next up, spells and conditions. First of all, spells are categorized not by class, but by tradition. There's 4 traditions: Arcane, standard wizard stuff; Occult, esoteric, mind-altering and sometimes dark magic; Primal, nature, both destruction and healing; and Divine, mostly support with some undead murdering super spells. All spells go into one of these traditions, and different classes use different traditions, with some having no choice, like the wizard being an arcane caster, and others getting to pick their traditions, such as the witch or the sorcerer. As for the spells themselves, they're generally pretty similar to 5e, in that someone casts a spell and it either targets AC or a saving throw. I've already mentioned that you only have 3 saving throws to worry about now, and aside from that, spells are a lot more balanced in PF2E, in that it's very difficult to find an encounter-ruining spell. The PF2E creators did a very good job of making marshals feel as powerful as casters, and most buffs in PF2E do not trump a character's abilities if said character has been built to be very good at something. PF2E has basically removed save or suck abilities from the game, at least against bosses, without needing things like legendary resistance. This is because of the trait system I mentioned earlier. Some spells have the incapacitation trait, which in basic terms means that if an enemy is more than twice the spell's level that you're casting, its degree of success is 1 higher than whatever it rolled. Ultimately, this means that a critical failure is impossible for a creature that's much more powerful than you are, which helps make boss encounters challenging, with no need for the GM to worry about the fight getting completely trivialized with an unlucky roll. Generally, though not always, casters in PF2E are better at versatility and area of effect damage, with marshals tending to be better at single target damage. Though all of this depends on how your character's been built, it's absolutely possible to be a very potent single target damager as a spellcaster, just as a marshal can be used to debuff an enemy. Speaking of debuffs, what about conditions? Well, PF2E has around 20 to 30 conditions, depending on how you class them, and they're actually very simple in how they work. They each tend to have a number associated with them, like being frightened 2 or dying 3, and each individual condition can stack with another one. But in the case where you might be frightened 1 and an enemy makes you frightened 1 again, this number does not increase. You only ever take the highest number of the condition to apply to your character, and the same goes for enemies. Each condition explains how it works in its text, and most of them work a little differently to conditions in 5e. I won't go over every one of them, as they tend to work as expected, even if it is a little bit different from 5e. We've had debuffs, but what about buffs? PF2E has more or less eradicated pre-buffing from the game entirely, so most buffs only tend to last for 1 fight. And there's no concentration mechanic here, at least not in the same way. Buffs either last until the duration ends, or they need sustaining, which is a single cost action you have to do every round to keep it going. The only way you lose the spell is if you couldn't sustain it, such as getting slowed and stunned to the point where you no longer have any actions. Summoning spells, by the way, need sustaining each round to keep them going, though by doing this, you give your summon 2 actions, meaning that you spend 1 action to give your summon 2. They also actually begin with 2 actions as soon as you summon them in, something I wanted to quickly mention so people don't think that spending 3 actions to summon in a preacher stops you from even getting to do anything on that turn. And while I'm talking buffs, there are only 4 types of bonuses in PF2E, and they work identically to conditions in that the higher number is the only one that counts, and that separate bonuses do stack with each other. These bonuses are Circumstance bonus, such as hiding behind cover; Status bonus, usually from a spell; Item bonus, from, well, items; and Untyped, which is barely ever used, but does exist. I'll make a quick mention of focus spells here. Some classes get focus points, which can be spent on focus spells. You can have a max of 3 focus points, and you can restore 1 every 10 minutes of refocusing between fights. These spells don't tend to be as powerful as proper spell slots, but you do get to reuse them over and over, so they're pretty nifty. Lay on Hands is actually a focus spell, meaning that you can use it over and over out of combat to heal someone to full. Who needs medicine? And yes, this is intentional design. Another change to make things a little simpler is that spell levels are called spell ranks in PF2E, so there's less ambiguity between character level and spell level. And I want to make a note about spellcaster types. PF2E follows the Vancian spellcasting style, a bit more like old school D&D. This means that prepared spellcasters, such as the Cleric, Druid, Magus, Witch, and Wizard, cannot freely heighten their spells without actually slotting that particular spell in that higher level slot. So if you prepare a fireball in a rank 3 slot, you can't just heighten it to rank 5 without specifically slotting it in there at the start of this adventuring day. Spontaneous casters, on the other hand, such as the Bard, Oracle, Psychic, Sorcerer, and Summoner, get to pick one signature spell every spell rank that they can freely heighten. Although Summoner's spells are all spontaneous, but they get limited slots, and I'm just gonna leave it there. Summoners are weird. Still, if you don't like this rule, you know how I mentioned class archetypes earlier? There's one for all the prepared spellcasters in the game called Flexible Spell Preparation, which actually does allow you to freely heighten spells, just like in 5e. It does come at the cost of one spell slot per rank, however. Lastly, a quick mention on rituals in PF2E. There is no ritual spellcasting here. Rituals instead are sort of big, weird spells that can do lots of different things, but they take a while to cast, usually involving multiple people, and have skill checks during the ritual itself. And even non-spellcasters can initiate rituals and help casting them, so long as they know the ritual itself and don't fail the skill checks. Rituals are things like controlling the weather, making plants grow quicker, summoning a permanent undead minion, or even resurrecting someone that's died up to a year ago. Just to make it clear, ritual and ritual spellcasting have nothing in common aside from the name. Right, that's spells and conditions done. The penultimate topic for this video is monsters and items. Monsters work very similarly to 5e, but they differ in two important ways. 1. Almost every single monster in PF2E has a unique ability it can use, and there's over 2,000 monsters currently in PF2E, making for a lot of unique special abilities, and this in turn can make each fight feel different. 2. Only around 10% of monsters in PF2E get opportunity attacks, or reactive strikes as they're called here, making combat much more movement oriented. It's pretty uncommon for characters in combat to stay stood in place for long in PF2E. Movement is much more commonplace. This also applies to the classes you play as, with only Fighter getting reactive strikes at level 1. Other martials can pick it up as they level though. As for items, PF2E has suggested rarities, item levels, costs, etc. all documented for the GM, and it's pretty common for players to look up items they want to purchase, rather than almost always having to rely on the GM to give it to them as loot. You don't attune to an item in PF2E, you invest in it instead, and this can be done instantaneously, rather than having to wait until after a short rest. You can also invest in up to 10 magical items at once, and there's even feats to increase this amount further, and due to PF2E only having 4 types of bonuses with limited stacking rules, you don't have to worry about characters getting crazy OP with too many magical items. On to weapons. PF2E has simple and martial, just like 5e, but it also has advanced weapons. You kind of have to go out of your way to get proficiency with a certain advanced weapon type, and just because it's advanced doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually all that much better than a martial weapon. But they do tend to come with some pretty interesting traits. Shields work quite differently in PF2E. Instead of them simply giving a passive AC bonus, you actually have to spend an action in combat to raise the shield to gain that bonus, which would be a circumstance bonus here. Some classes also get the reaction Shield Block, which allows you to literally block damage. When this happens, the shield negates some of the damage, and you and the shield take the remainder, which can ultimately break the shield. And that can be repaired with the crafting skill. This makes shields an active part of the game, and they have actual, genuine, really interesting functions. Again, this opens up tactical possibilities in combat. And briefly, I'll talk about runes in PF2E. Instead of immediately throwing away your first equipment as soon as better ones come along, PF2E uses runes to allow you to upgrade your weapons and armor, bringing them in line with you as you level up. You get potency runes, which give you bonuses on your to hit chance if it's a weapon, or an increased AC if it's armor, striking runes that increase the amount of dice you roll with your weapon on a hit, and property runes that can do things like add fire damage or make enemies frightened on a crit. There's also resiliency runes for your armor, which increase your saving throw bonuses. And you can get better versions of these throughout your campaign as you level up. Oh, and there's lots of weapon types, armor types, and shield types out there, as well as magical equipment. It's easy to get lost with the amount of stuff PF2E has. It feels gargantuan at times, and there's still lots more coming every year. Okay, we are through the majority of the things that make Pathfinder 2nd edition different to D&D 5th edition. I just want to quickly go over some miscellaneous little changes so that things will be simpler if you do indeed start to play PF2E. Opposed roles. There aren't any in PF2E. Instead of two sides competing, whoever is doing the action is the only one that rolls, and they go against a number plus 10. For example, if someone wants to grapple you, they have to roll an athletics check versus your fortitude DC. Whenever an action calls for one of these DCs, that means that you look at your number, then plus 10 to it. If the person doing the action beats that number, then they are successful. And it works with the 4 degrees of success too. You know, that plus 10 crit thing. The 3 modes of play: exploration, encounter, and downtime. These are basically just a simplification to make things a little easier to GM. When you're in exploration mode, you get to pick a certain action like scout or defend, and the GM will give you the appropriate bonus if necessary. Like if you're scouting, everyone in the party gets a +1 to the initiative score, and if you're defending, you automatically have your shield raised before your first turn. Stealth can also be used during exploration mode, and the specific skill is called Avoid Notice. So long as you aren't spotted, you only need to roll stealth once, unless the GM says otherwise. Encounter mode is exactly as it sounds, though it's meant to be activated as soon as one party tries something hostile against another, or when the GM decides that things need to be done action by action. This can get confusing during stealth segments, and stealthing from out of combat to into combat can be very confusing for new GMs and players. There's a great video by the YouTube channel How It's Played that goes into how all this works, which I'll link to in the description, as it'll take me a little while to explain, and this video is already more than long enough. Suffice to say, once you understand it and have done it a couple of times, it's extremely simple. It just seems complex on the surface. Speaking of stealth, some abilities like sneak have the secret trait, which means that your GM is actually the one that does the roll for you. This means that you have no idea if you did a good or a bad job, and this can help reduce metagaming. It can also lead to hilarious moments when you don't realize how poorly the job you were doing with a certain action until your GM tells you. Okay, that was a bit of a weird tangent, but onto downtime mode. This is where characters can do things like subsisting, crafting, and earning income from doing things like day-to-day jobs. Crafting is a bit of a beast in PF2E and isn't always worth it if you follow the base rules, as it ends up costing you a similar amount to if you just bought the item, as it's really meant for campaigns where items aren't as easy to come by. Couple of other little nuggets of info. XP needed to level doesn't increase as your level does. It's always 1000 XP, though lower level monsters than you give less XP. This means that leveling tends to stay pretty consistent, usually being around 3 sessions for each level, which I love because I hate being punished and not getting to play with my character build just because I'm a higher level. You also get XP for disabling traps or avoiding them entirely, and for successful conversations, such as getting some information out of someone. You don't get XP for role-playing, unfortunately. And a quick note to GMs out there, the encounter building numbers are correct. If an encounter says it'll be a severe encounter, you better hope your players know what they're doing, and if it's extreme, there's literally a 50-50 chance that they'll die. Be very careful planning encounters, GMs. My method is to use the Mimic Fight Club website, as it does all the maths for you, and I'll link to it in the description. Recall knowledge. Characters can spend an action in combat or out of combat trying to recall information about a creature. They roll a certain skill check depending on the creature type, and if they succeed, the GM can give them some information straight from the creature's stat block. This ability also has the secret trait, and if you roll a nat 1, the GM is supposed to lie to you and literally give you incorrect info, like saying that a fire elemental takes damage from fire. Hero points. Similar to inspiration in 5e, each player starts each session with a hero point, which can be spent on a d20 roll to have it re-rolled. This is not rolling with advantage, however. Whatever the result is your second time around is your final result. You can earn up to 3 hero points at one time, awarded by your GM for heroic or cool moments, though this is of course GM discretion. And it's a bit of a learning curve for GMs to learn when to give out hero points. You get used to it though. Hero points can also be used to stabilize your character if they are dying, though this always costs all of the hero points from your pool. And the hero point system is a core PF2E game mechanic, so basically every table is going to use it. And with the mention of rolling with advantage, PF2E actually doesn't have a lot of that in it. There's not that many spells and abilities that will give you roll with advantage or roll with disadvantage. You tend to get little bonuses like +1 or +2 instead. I'll only briefly go over this, but the dying rules are a bit different in PF2E. You're getting knocked out in combat gives you the dying condition, which increases each time you go down. And when you get back up, you get stuck with the wounded condition until you're healed by treat wounds or are healed to full HP. The wounded condition gets added to your dying condition each time you go down, and vice versa, meaning that you can't just keep bouncing up and down with no consequences in PF2E. While you're dying, you get to make what's called a flat check, which is literally just a flat d20 roll. These are also used for persistent damage effects, with the DC usually being 15, though your allies can help you with that. But when you're dying, the DC is always 10 plus your dying value, meaning it gets harder and harder to meet that DC. And fail it too many times and you'll get to dying 4, which is dead. And now onto more pleasant topics. Gold is worth more. Basically exactly as it sounds, gold is worth much more to characters in PF2E, and so you'll see some monetary rewards as pretty low until you understand the actual economy here. Variant rules. There's lots of them, and I have no intention of going into any of them here, though I will mention free archetype briefly. Remember how I said you can pick up a mini class via a dedication? Well, normally this costs a class fee, but with the free archetype variant rule, you get a free feat just for dedications and the feats they get every 2 levels. It's so popular that most tables play with it, probably similar to feats being optional in 5e and how most tables play with them on. While I personally love the Pathfinder lore, you don't actually need to play on Pathfinder's World Golarion to play the system, though I think it's definitely worth your time reading up on it. It's basically a kitchen sink setting in that each nation can be vastly different from another, so you can play almost any sort of campaign you want. For example, Varissia is for more classic fantasy stuff, whereas Numeria is like a post-apocalyptic world with giant irradiated monsters and robots walking around. And Jeb is an undead nation that lies in between the mana wastes, where too much war has caused magic to act unpredictably, so people rely on technology there, aka steampunk. And that's just a few of the dozens of nations within the Pathfinder setting. There's something for everyone here. Other than that, there's gods, vampires, angels, demons, dragons, all your standard fantasy stuff. I highly recommend looking into the lore if you're interested. There's plenty of info on the wiki, which I'll link to. I'll quickly mention that the books for PF2E are extremely well regarded, and even with personal bias aside, they're high quality books, have really cool art on almost every page, and are absolutely well worth your money if you're into that. Edicts and Anathema replace alignment in PF2E, meaning characters, both PC and NPC, are able to have much deeper, more morally complex personalities. So instead of following an alignment chart, you instead get to pick things that your character strives for, things that your character would never do, etc. Just be aware that some damage types that mention alignment still might crop up in the Archives of Nethys or some of the older books, and I'll explain why now. PF2E has been remastered. After Wizards of the Coast and the whole OGL fiasco, which I'm not going to bore you with now, Paizo decided to go back and replace the OGL from their system with the Open RPG Creative license, or the ORC license. At the same time, they decided to fix up and refine some things, creating the PF2E remaster. Thus, some of the books are out of date, but if you just want to get started, you only really need Player Core and GM Core. And if you're a player, you don't need GM Core, and quite frankly, you could just look everything up in the Archives of Nethys anyway. So, if you see good, evil, lawful, chaotic, etc. damage anywhere, it's basically being replaced with spirit damage. And positive and negative damage is replaced by vitality and void, respectively. I only say this because it can be rather confusing for new players browsing online to see damage types that are no longer used in the remaster. Okay, moving on. PF2E actually doesn't have a great deal of this so far, though Roll for Combat and Classes Plus are known as the better bits of third-party content out there. I'll link those in the description, as ever. This is mostly because PF2E honestly just already has so much content that's well designed and well balanced, and Paizo releases so much more every year. As of the release of this video, there'll be 4 new classes coming over the next year or two. Never mind all the other content that'll be coming our way, like Starfinder 2nd Edition, which is 100% compatible with PF2E, by the way, meaning you can have space elves fighting dragons with lightsabers and longbows if you like. Though that doesn't come out probably until 2025. Okay, I think we're done. This video chapter was a behemoth for me to accomplish, so please like and subscribe if you found the content helpful or interesting. I really think with the amount of info I've thrown at you, my dear viewer, you'll have more than enough knowledge to easily get started with PF2E, or you'll understand enough of the differences to get PF2E. Sorry for the giant information dump, but there's so many things to talk about when comparing these systems that I don't really know of an easier way to go about it. Despite us nearing the end, I would like to hear from people who have transitioned over from 5e over to PF2e. Please tell me the things that were most confusing for you, or the parts you loved the most, and if you have any simpler ways of explaining some of the more confusing parts of PF2e. Or if you're considering moving over but have some questions, throw them at me. I'll do my best to reply. But that's it for this video chapter. This is Dominic of the Dominomicon, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.